Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 4 LEC overview, analysis, and at the end, my power rankings for Week 4. This is going to be very exciting. This week was kind of interesting. There are a couple games that I'm really excited to talk about, obviously some that were a lot less close. But overall, it was a pretty fun week, I think, for LEC action. This is the first video I've posted in a couple of days since the weekend. We've had a little bit of time off, obviously no LPL, no LCK this past week. And so we've had a little bit of time to process some of what's happened at the beginning of the season. And now we get to jump back in to some LEC action who have all of a sudden taken first in the world in terms of who is farthest ahead in their season and who will finish first by the end of spring at least. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into some LEC games. I don't want to keep you guys waiting too long. So let's jump into the first game of day 1. And that was the battle of 9th versus 10th. Astralis taking on SK Gaming to kick off week 4. Certainly a game to kick off the week with. It was an SK Gaming win. And it was not super pretty from either side, if we're all being honest. Astralis is really bad. And SK is also really bad, if we're being completely fair. Let's start with that level 3 dive bot lane. That just didn't go well in any sense of the word. Obviously, they wanted to trade. Jezu and Treats, I should say, wanted to trade because they were up in levels and the wave was crashing and they wanted to deny CS. And they were like, we'll die as long as we kill them, it's worth it. Unfortunately, they didn't quite have any damage to actually kill them. So they int bot lane, kind of get Astralis' bot lane back into the game after, you know, being pretty far up early. And then Gilius has a pretty decent early game as well, getting ahead. You end up going into fights late game. Treats goes in on this Leona, you know, late game fight, kind of whiffs everything, but it's fine. Certus hits the shockwave because of it, and SK is able to pick up the win. Certus was their player of the game. I guess he's mine as well. He was the only one who really made like a special play in this one. I think Gilius overall played really well, and so did GenX on the Jace, who just did a load of damage, like an unbelievable amount of damage, but I mean, really none of that damage was super impactful, quote unquote. This was mostly just about Astralis playing bad rather than SK playing particularly well. Zanzara is just not good. There's really no other way to put it at this point. He has been maybe the worst player in the LEC in 2022. Not that a lot of his teammates are that far behind him. Kabe played pretty poor in this one as well. I think he flashed into a Jinx ult at one point, which is just, that's a play I make in solo queue, and everyone flames me for that there. You can't make that play on the pro stage. No one on this team is good. Dior isn't good. Kabe isn't good. Promise Q isn't good. White Knight isn't good. Zanzara isn't good. It's just, Astralis is your 0 and 18 team all day long. They seem to have no counter to anybody really doing anything. Even when they get a lead like they did early in the game here after that weird dive bot lane, they just can't do anything with it. They play so passive and they play so scared. It's almost like they're not ready to be in the LEC. And, you know, starting 0 and 8, I guess that would kind of lend credence to that. But yeah, this team has been completely anemic and completely inept since the first moment that they stepped onto the Rift in week 1. They've not been good in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's a good win for SK. They needed to win this game in order to not be my worst team in the league. But, you know, beating Astralis doesn't really inspire a ton of confidence for a team that, even in the process of doing so, didn't look very good. Jumping into our second game here of day 1, we had Rogue taking on Excel. The 7-0 Rogue, a team that's kind of jumped off to a huge lead to start the year, is continuing that here with a pretty dominant win over an Excel team that has shown quite a few interesting things over the course of the year, and especially last week with Mickey at the beginning of it, or at the end of it, I should say, looking like they're kind of starting to come together. Rogue just runs them over. I mean, this was not particularly close. A lot of people are criticizing Excel's draft, and that I can understand, although I'm not particularly upset by it. I think I kind of understand. Obviously, the concept I definitely understand. You pick the Sona mid because you're trying to hyperscale with the Jinx. You're putting all your eggs into the Patrick basket, which is fine. He's probably your best carry player. Unfortunately, Patrick, for some reason, builds Gale Force RFC, which it typically wouldn't be too bad on Jinx, but when you are like the only damage, on that team, which Jinx kind of is. It's just you're not going to be doing enough damage to break through. I mean, they've got Ornn Volley Bear, like Nami heals. You're going to have to be doing a ludicrous amount of damage on that Jinx to have that hyper carry pick kind of be worth it. And it absolutely was not in this one. I do want to give a shout out to Larson, who played really well on the Corki. He actually did something really smart here. Going into the Sona, you have pretty much a completely free lane. Sona has really no way to poke you out. You have complete lane pressure, even if you don't have the kill pressure, quote unquote. So Larson went Cole, and I think that that's incredibly smart. Going Cole in this matchup, it allows you to scale into that hyper Corki a lot faster. Even though Sona's build is like relatively cheaper, having Corki get on those items significantly quicker, and obviously he got gold early, and so it didn't matter as much anyways, but, you know, I think as an idea, that was really, really smart from Larson. Larson is going to be my player of the game here. This very well could have gone to Odoamne, who was fantastic on this Ornn. Just a real showing of, I mean, unbelievable team fighting from Odoamne. He had great, I mean, his solo lane pressure was unbelievable as well. He was just better than Finn. Odo has been, like, sneakily the best player on this team to start the year. Malrang and Larson, I think, have also been really good. And obviously, Comp has been really good as well. But I don't know. Odo has just been so ridiculously consistent to start this year. I can't remember a single game in which he didn't win lane, which is crazy. I mean, he's playing weak side pretty much every game, and it doesn't matter because he's just that much better than everybody else he's playing against here. But yeah, Larson's going to get it just for being the quote-unquote carry. But Odo in our spirit absolutely has it. Comp and Trimby pick the lane that I've criticized to no end, Lucian Nami, and do fine on it. This is a lane that, against something like Jinx, Leona should win early. You know, theoretically speaking. Obviously, those champions are both kind of weak right now, so it's hard to really know. But they do win. They do kind of scale. And Rogue just gets to the point where it doesn't matter. By 20 minutes, the game is completely over. There's nothing Excel can do. Even if Marcoon has some gold on him on the Lee Sin, at that point, it just doesn't matter. Lee Sin can't do anything into Corki anyways, so just a rough game here for Excel. Nobody on Excel played particularly well. I especially don't like... Nuke Duck is going to get my dud of the game here. This could have easily gone to Mickey. It could have gone to Finn as well, both of whom played, I think, poorly. But Nuke Duck, when you're playing that Sona, you just have to... You have to hyperscale. You have to, you know, get to that point, and he just lost too hard. I think for me to say that he played, like, he didn't play the matchup right. When you pick a pick like Sona mid, you have to play the matchup right, and he just didn't. And so, yeah, not really a lot of room for this Excel team to actually win this game when Corki's online and your Jinx isn't particularly online. This could have gone to Patrick, but it would only really go to him for the build. And like I said, honestly, Finn kind of deserved it as well for just getting outplayed in the top lane, quite frankly. But Nuke Duck also got outplayed in the mid lane. So Excel not looking too great in this one. Every time it looks like they have a little bit of momentum, they seem to just kind of fall back. This is pretty standard of Excel. We've seen this the past few years as well. They really just can't string any sort of streak at all together. They're pretty constantly a good team, but never good enough to really kind of push for like a playoff spot or anything. This is kind of, we're getting to the point where it feels kind of similar, where they'll pick games up here and there, but not enough for them to really be considered a good team. And Rogue is just unstoppable at this point. They're you know, completely unbeatable when they are in this zone. They just seem to feel confident in every single play that they make, and they definitely have the skill to pull it off. So whoever ends up taking down Rogue, if any team ends up taking down Rogue, it'll be interesting to see what happens to Rogue after that. I imagine, you know, the confidence will maybe be hit just a tad, but right now, I mean, this team is just flying on all cylinders, and I don't expect that to stop anytime soon or until anything drastic happens. Moving on to Game 3 here of Day 1, we had a really fun one here between Team Vitality and Misfits Gaming that Vitality is able to pick up. This was just a blast of a game, a really chaotic, crazy, low macro game, which seems to be Vitality's style, and honestly, it seems to be Misfits' style a little bit as well, but Vitality really thrives in the chaos here with how talented this team is. Really, the biggest struggle that I think they have had recently has just been being a team and not just 5 really good players, but in a game like this, it really doesn't matter when you're able to just kind of completely dominate the macro game because you're just better than everybody else. Player of the game is going to Perks. I'm not going to argue that at all. He was phenomenal here on Yasuo. This was one of the best Yasuo games I'd seen all year from pretty much anybody When he wins, he wins so hard, and he's going into VTO, who is a really good mid laner, one of the best players in the LEC, full stop, this year. And he won hard in lane. Not that he was killing VTO, and not that VTO particularly played horrible, just that Perks' laning is pretty out of control right now. He is up like 60 CS every single game. I know he had that horrible week 1, so his like full stats, like his entire season stats, are pretty deflated, I guess you could say. His laning since that has been pretty much untouchable. His stats have been ludicrous. He has dominated everybody in lane. He's always up like 100 million CS, and it's close to perfect, and it doesn't matter who he's going into, and it really doesn't matter the matchup. He's just always winning. Selfmade gives him a lot of attention as well. Obviously, in this matchup, you have to. You're Diana Yasuo, but in the, particularly speaking, I think these two have really kind of got on well at the beginning of the season, and they're kind of the big bright spot, I think, for Vitality, the big reason why this team has started to surge, and has really started to show the form that they really should have been showing from week 1. But honestly, everybody on this team played well. Perks was really, really good early, and he played well in those team fights. Carzzy gets a lot of shit, even in my comments section. Carzzy gets a lot of crap because he's just not that standout player. He's one of the more consistent, like, damage sources in team fights, and he kind of showed that in this game. He just does damage, right? That's all Carzzy does, is he's not really the main focus, but he is a very consistent DPS output, and he was really good on the Caitlyn in this one. Labrav, I don't know how Labrav made some of those plays on the Karma, but he gets out of there alive, and then Selfmade with, like, the 5-man ultimate late in the game as Diana, that I'll kind of blame on Misfits, but also good play by Selfmade to make it. Vitality just looking good, honestly. They're looking, I wouldn't say clean, but they're looking strong. Misfits, on the other hand, I would argue is not looking clean, especially in this one. It's really, Misfits is the same story every single game, which is VTO versus the world. And that's really what this was. It was the Silas trying his best to win these team fights, and the rest of the team just not being good enough. I don't know who the shot caller on this team is. I believe it's Schlatan here, but whoever the macro shot caller is on this team is not doing a good job. This team just randomly decides to flip every single objective and every single advantage that they have in the game. I don't even really know how to say it. This team has no concept of actually maintaining a lead early and continuing that, even if they have a lead. And that's very clear when they go up against good teams. The dud of the game here is going to be Mersa, who was just constantly caught out on the Nautilus trying to get vision. I get it, you're the only person on this team who can really successfully get vision, but I mean, you gotta be more proactive and more careful than this. You're just constantly getting caught out. We've seen it multiple times from Mersa at multiple points this season. It's something that is definitely a weakness of his game. This could have gone to Herit as well in the top lane, who did not play well on the Jace. And it could have gone to Schlatan on the Lee Sin, who, as the jungler, kind of gave away every single objective in the entire map to Selfmade. Even if he wasn't particularly bad in the team fights, it was just kind of blah, you know? Misfits just felt kind of blah. This feels like VTO really trying his best to carry a team that is just not good enough to make playoffs, but they're going to end up making playoffs anyways because VTO is just that good. So we'll see. I don't know. When this team plays well, they play well, and when they play poorly, they play really, really poorly. They're like 4 players on this team play like they shouldn't be in the LEC, and that's kind of what this game felt like for Misfits. It was not a particularly good one. But Vitality, you know, a good win for them, a very good win for Perks, and they continue their hot streak after what was a slow start to the year. Moving on to Game 4 here of Day 1, we had G2 Esports taking on Team BDS, and a pretty solid win here for G2 that was pretty much confirmed from, like, minute 3, I don't know, pretty early on. I don't remember the exact timestamp, but obviously this game has become a little bit of a YouTube hit, a clip hit, if you will, for the first 3 minutes of this game, in which Adam takes 2 1v1s top lane and dies twice before 3 minutes on the Aurelia into the Jace. Not exactly the start that you're looking for if you're BDS, and not exactly what you're looking for if you're Adam. I'll talk about G2 first, but I'll get into BDS, who, you know, at some point is going to need to do something, but Yankos. I mean, that guy's just so good. Poppy's such a perfect pick for Yankos as well. You guys know that Poppy is one of my favorite junglers in the meta right now, and what a perfect pick for a player like Yankos, who just loves to facilitate and, like, create plays around the map for his team. He did that in spades on this champion. It got to the point where it was nuts. Some really, really fun plays made, kind of capped on by Nuclear trying to ult in on the Vex, and then just getting Poppy ulted out in the middle of the ultimate. Like, what an awesome interaction that is. Everybody loves that, but really, this was never in doubt. I mean, the game took maybe a little bit longer than I expected, but when you have such a fed, like, group of players on your team, honestly, I was going to say, like, solo laners, but Fnatic was ridiculously fed as well. Like, when Jace, Ryze, and Senna have so much gold over their opponents, it's pretty much impossible to win this game from the side of BDS. And a lot of that was just due to Jankos completely taking over the map, taking every objective, you know, being really fun to watch on the Poppy, kind of making plays all around the map. It really just was never in doubt. Obviously, Broken Blade getting that huge lead with 2 kills early onto Adam basically makes that lane impossible for the Aurelia. And then Flacket honestly played really well on the Senna, because Targamas was really good on the top Kench as well. This bot lane has really started to develop some chemistry, and they've really started to look good in laning phase, which is where I think they struggled at least early on in the season. They are looking good now. I think Flacket and Targamas are kind of up there for one of the more consistent bot lanes in the LEC after not starting as much. And then Caps is really starting to find his groove. Tank Ryze has been a pick that he's gone to a couple times this year, and while I'm not a huge fan of the pick, when you're this far ahead, it's pretty much impossible to deal with. That's kind of where this pick really accelerates on, is when you are really far ahead, no one can actually deal with the Ryze. It's just when people can actually deal with it that it becomes an issue, but in this game, that was certainly not the case. A really, really clean game from G2, honestly, overall. Obviously, some weird plays in the middle, but a clean game overall, I would say, from G2, and a good win. BDS just has problems. They have things that they need to work out. Some of these players are just not LEC ready, right? Syncroft is not one of those players. Syncroft has actually been, I think, really good to start the year, and he was pretty good in this game as well on the Jarvan. It's just really tragic that the rest of his team has been not good at all. It's really just been Syncroft, and then you've had games of Nuclear playing well, but Adam, Xmatty, and Limit are just completely unplayable right now. There's really no other way to put it. They are not LEC caliber. Adam, the dud of the game here, I don't think you could possibly give it to anybody else. He died twice before 3 minutes. There's really no one else you could give it to. It's not like he played particularly well after that, and it's not like he's played particularly well before that this year. He's had a really, really rough 2022. I expected a lot more out of Adam. Just mechanically speaking, I thought he was better than this, but he's not. He's clearly just someone who plays one style, and if that style doesn't work, he can't play anything else. He has to be complete strong side, carry the game kind of player, or else it's just FF, right? Because he can't play the Aurelia. He can't play those champs that aren't just like Darius Olaf, I'm running at you and trying to kill you. There's really no other way to put it. I don't like making generalization statements about players, but it's been weeks now of this, and at some point you just have to call it out. Xmatty and Limit are also one of the worst bot lanes in the LEC. I'm not going to say they're the worst, because there's definitely a worse bot lane on Astralis, but they're certainly up there. I would say they're the second worst. They just have no pressure in lane. They lose 2v2 every single game, and then Xmatty isn't showing that kind of team fight versatility that he did when he was when he was on K-Corp. It's just not there. It's not working right now. BDS has to make some changes. I would expect those changes to be made relatively soon as well. They have a pretty good amateur team, or I guess ERL team, and I imagine some of those players are going to be leaking their way into BDS very, very soon. It's just going to be, how long will this team take until, it starts to implode? But yeah, as they are constructed right now, they are nothing more than like a bottom 3 team. But for G2, a solid win here. They continue their run of hot form. They've been really, really good this year off the back of, honestly, Jankos, Broken Blade, and Targamas just being really, really good. And that continued in this one, and hopefully it can continue for a little while for the rest of the season. Jumping into our final game here of day 1, we had Mad Lions taking on Fnatic. Fnatic kind of the kings of the last game of the day over the course of the LEC season. And Fnatic takes this one. They take it in a decently clean game, although a little bit of questioning here and there from some plays Fnatic made. But overall, pretty clean one here. Hylissang is phenomenal. I mean, really, he's the MVP of the split so far. He's been ridiculously good. Maybe not the whole split because, Rogue. But he's been so ridiculously good. This is the best season he's ever had. I will take almost no arguments for that. He's been the most consistent he has ever been in terms of just being a force. Not only did he win bot lane for him, an upset here. Pretty much dominating the Zeri Yuumi, who, you know, the Zeri looked pretty inept in this one, but also roaming mid and basically winning mid for the victor here for Humanoid as well. Just a ridiculously good game from Hylissang, absolutely deserving of his MVP. He was the most impactful player in this game, without a doubt. But yeah, upset in Humanoid getting really, really strong, really, really fed from a lot of Thresh roams, and then just using that gold to basically scale into Oblivion. And then there's Wonder on the top side, who they're like, well, they're spending a lot of pressure bot, you know, they're putting a lot of attention here, a lot of, you know, resources. Let's try and dive Wonder top lane. Why, at this point in the game, why are you even attempting to do that? They try to dive Wonder, does not go well. Wonder's just too freaking good. He just barely dies in the 1v3 tower dive top lane, but still, it's ridiculously well played. Still picks up, I believe, a kill or two from it. Just ludicrous. I mean, ludicrously good for Wonder. He's playing some of the best of his career as well. After what was a pretty down year last year, I think overall he's playing better. And then obviously Upset's playing really well. As for Mad Lions, part of this game was really good, right? Elyoya had a pretty good game here, as he has had pretty much all year. Elyoya's been the guy, I think, for this Mad Lions team when they're winning. That has really just been dominant and really tough to deal with. And he was in this game on the Gwen, especially with that Yuumi. Gwen with a Yuumi on her back is really difficult to actually deal with and kill. And we saw that even when Elyoya was pretty behind in terms of gold compared to like the carries of Fnatic, he was still really, really tough to actually kill. But, you know, the rest of the team was pretty far behind at that point. Reeker is my dud of the game here on the Renekton. Didn't play particularly well into Humanoid, but also, especially after Hylissang started coming mid a lot, just not really much you can do on that Renekton. Once you start to die, you just kind of continue to die. This could have gone to Unforgiven on the Zeri, who definitely looked like a first-time Zeri on stage. I'm not sure if he actually did, but he was having trouble just CSing on that champion. Not a good first Zeri game in the LEC. Obviously, we've seen it a little bit in NA Academy, but not a great first Zeri game in like a major region. Definitely not the one you wanted to like show off the power of the champion, because the champion felt pretty giga useless in this one. But overall, you know, Mad Lions just not looking particularly on that level, which I think is fair to say, right? We've seen it kind of throughout the course of the season. They're a good team, but they're probably the top, or I don't know how to say it. They're either the top of that next tier, the top of that like B, C tier, or they're the bottom of like the upper tier. It's one of those two, right? They're kind of hanging on, ideally by a thread, just based off the fact that Elyoya is playing really well, and Kaiser's had a decent start to the year. Unforgiven's been good for the most part, but certainly wasn't in this one. They certainly have their weaknesses, though. Solo lanes have been a weakness. Reeker was still a weakness in this one. And that's kind of keeping them out of that upper echelon of teams, like Fnatic is in. But Fnatic definitely has earned that. They definitely look like the better team here, pretty much in every single lane. And I imagine that will continue on with Fnatic just being on fire right now. And I mean, after, you know, it's good for them to get such a solid and clean win, I would say, after what was kind of a bad week last week. That's going to bring us into our day 2 games, and kicking off day 2 here of week 4 was Misfits Gaming taking on SK Gaming. A Misfits win here that they pretty desperately needed to kind of keep momentum from stalling completely on this team, which it felt like it had for a little bit. This comp is super aggressive. It allows them to make plays, and I think that's exactly what you want to do against a team that has kind of shown that they are not really capable of stopping other teams from making really good plays against them. A little bit of question marks early, but really VTO was the guy in this one on the Yasuo. He gets beat by Perks' Yasuo earlier in the week. You know, the day before he says, well, I guess it's my turn, and picks the Yasuo, has a really poor engage early on in the river, dies for basically no reason, and then from that point on just turbo smurfs the rest of the game. He says, that was my one Yasuo, you know, play. My 0-1 power spike is hit, and now I'm going to win the game. And he absolutely did that. He was unbelievable. Another Misfits win that is almost entirely off the back of VTO just being better than pretty much everybody else he's playing against. He is slowly just becoming like one of the best players in the LEC, regardless of play, like regardless of team or position or whatever you want to talk about. He is just unbelievable and really difficult to actually play against. His laning phase isn't particularly like dominant like in the same way that someone like Perks is right now, or that Caps was like in his prime, or even Larson is right now as well. Like, it's not like this laning phase is just like really, really difficult to go into and he just snowballs out of control from there. It's the fact that his team fighting is essentially perfect. He's like, he's just phenomenal at obtaining gold and then outputting the damage he needs to make his team successful in whatever way that needs to be, right? He is the perfect hard carry on a bad team. And I'm not saying Misfits is a bad team, but I'm certainly not saying that they're a great team. Neon actually had a pretty good game here. Neon and Mersa, I thought, played well in the bot lane. They were kind of the other bright spot. Not to say here and Schlatzon didn't play well, but really VTO was the guy in this one, just kind of creating so much. And then Neon and Mersa actually had a pretty good 2v2 bot lane experience. On the side of SK, it has to go to Gilius. I mean, Gilius picks the Volibear in this one. A champ that I just don't have a lot of confidence in particular in this meta, but just in general. And that ultimate can really be a problem. Volibear has a lot of engage potential and disruption ability, especially in closed-off team fights against a team that, for the most part, wants to stay relatively grouped. You know, with the Yasuo, Diana, Aphelios, Thresh, like, you do a lot together. And Volibear just has so much potential to disrupt that. And Gilius really only used his ultimate to disengage in this game and to run away, and that's just, it feels like such a waste. Gilius is having a really poor start to the year, about as poor of a start to the year as he's almost ever had. At this point, it's looking like he's just not an LEC caliber jungler, which is what we saw last year as well when he got replaced and wasn't in the LEC for the second half. So yeah, it's looking like we're going back to that. Really, nobody on this team looked particularly great. Really, it was just Jezu getting a lot of the cleanup gold in general, but outside of that, no one looked good on SK. This team is certainly the second worst team in the LEC at this point. I do think there is a gap between them and Astralis. I don't think that they should be clumped together as, like, the same tier of team. I think Astralis is, like, on their own as the worst team, and then SK is just probably in their own tier, or maybe with BDS, and that next tier is just, like, blah. They really don't have anything going for them. But at least BDS has Syncroft. Like, SK has Treats, I guess, who's played all right early in the season, but he's had a couple of really bad games back-to-back here, so it's just really hard to know. This SK team just really isn't much. And then for Misfits, like I said, this team's very coin flippy. It's very much, if we're playing a good team, we're probably going to get clobbered, but if we're playing a bad team, we're probably just going to be able to outskill them because VTO is better than everyone on that team. But outside of that, outside of VTO, like, hard carrying this team and just being the guy that you could put all of the gold and all the resources in to win you the game, I'm not really sure what Misfits has going for them. So yeah, I think they're a good team, but a very one-dimensionally good team overall. Jumping into game 2 here of day 2, we had the Mad Lions taking on Team BDS in a game that I think both teams really needed to win in order to kind of stabilize some confidence, to kind of get back on the right track. And both teams really had opportunities to win it, that's for sure, but Mad does come out with the victory in 45 minutes. Off the back of Kaiser just being really freaking good on that Thresh. Just absurdly, absurdly good. Although, the early game was definitely a little bit questionable. BDS actually jumps out to a pretty decent lead early in the game. A lot of gold on Nuclear Ant, a lot of gold on Adam. And they really start to move forward. They start to play aggressive, but maybe just a tad bit too aggressive. Syncroft does a really good job, I think, of getting his team leads on that Xin Zhao. I think they're up like 6k gold at one point, and then the game just starts to go poorly, more poorly, more poorly, more poorly. Mad Lions win. Yeah, it was pretty insane. Adam had a really, really bad game, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about the good on Mad Lions, and a lot of that comes from Kaiser just being really phenomenal here on the Thresh, setting up that Graves and that Victor to do an absurd amount of damage and have a really, really good team fight, just kind of like core, I would say, together there. Kaiser missed a hook early, I believe, like early in the mid game there, it's probably somewhere around like 15 minutes. In a bush that was pretty automatic, and then from that point onward, it's just like, you can't miss. This is peak Kaiser. This is the guy that I called the best support in the LEC, and he showed up in this one. That's for sure an amazing game here from the Thresh. But also, shout out to Reeker and shout out to Armad, who have been kind of the weaknesses of this team, quote-unquote, and they both had really, really great games, especially Reeker, who is really the big damage dealer for this Mad Lions team in those team fights late game that kind of got them back into it. He was a big reason why they won this game. I want to talk about Unforgiven for a second, because he actually had a little bit of a rough week. His score might not necessarily indicate that, but Unforgiven, this was a lot closer to the Unforgiven I expected when the season first started, which is he has really good like positioning and mechanics when he's ahead, but when he's not necessarily like confident in where he wants to be, he can sometimes get over aggressive, and he can kind of have poor positioning in team fights late game on champions like Aphelios, you know, these champions that where positioning matters like a lot. He kind of had that in this game. Kaiser had to do a lot of work in these team fights to peel off for the Aphelios. Fortunately, Kaiser was just too good in this one, and you're playing Thresh, and you have so much peel, and that's why you pick it with the Aphelios. But Unforgiven had a little bit of a rough week. I imagine he'll bounce back, just something to, you know, to note. And then Elyoya on the Lee Sin was making plays all around the map. You know, exactly what we want to see from Elyoya. But moving on to BDS, they had this game. Like, the fact that they didn't win this game is absurd. Synchroff had a really good early game here on the Xin Zhao. He's just way too good for the rest of this roster. There really is no other way to say it. Nuclearint is also fine. He had a decent game here on the LeBlanc. He got a lot of kills. Early on, he had a lot of gold. Just couldn't really do anything with it. They got to the point where they just stalled. And they just kept taking bad fights with Mad Lions, who ended up winning those fights and were able to come back from the 6k gold. Adam's actually going to be my dud of the game here. He was atrocious in these late game team fights on that Camille. Really just the opposite of how you want to play Camille in this late game. Just kind of going in and dying over and over again. Really just kind of setting his team up for failure. Not a good week for Adam. Really not much you can do on BDS when your top laner is just kind of inting in team fights like this, but not like one of the worst late game performances we've seen all year long. Honestly, if I'm being completely honest, just a horrible game here from Adam after like 25 minutes. Not to say that like, you know, Nuclearint or Limit played these fights particularly well, but you know, you can only do so much when your top laner is just running it, actively running it, and that's pretty much what happened to BDS. This team is not good. You have like I said earlier, you have a pretty good ERL team. You've got some good players on there that have. I don't know, like, do you count like Aggressive as having LEC experience? Obviously, Crown Shot has LEC experience. Like, you have players on that team that are capable of playing in the LEC, at least in my opinion, like talent-wise. I think it's really only a matter of time before we start seeing them in the LEC, because this team, I think, does have pieces. It's not like Astralis and SK where it feels completely hopeless. Like, Synchroff has had a really good start to the year, and I think Nuclearint has kind of had games where he's looked good, and games where he's looked bad as well, obviously, but you know, he's at least had moments where I'm like, well, he could be on a good team. You know, there are pieces here on BDS to make me think that they have something that they can win with, but it's certainly not going to happen if this roster continues to play like this with you know, pick your poison of one person on this team just completely ending the game away every single game. But yeah, Mad needed this win. I think in the fashion they won it too was going to definitely inspire some confidence after being down and being able to come back and win. A really brutal loss for the mentality of BDS, but a good one for Mad Lions. Moving on to Game 3 here of Day 2, we had the 0-8 Astralis team taking on the super team themselves, Team Vitality. Vitality pulls out the win. I mean, that's good. Astralis was in a position to win this game, but somehow they, you know, the Corki gets outscaled. Question mark, pings. Just kidding. This is not Dior's fault in any way, shape, or form. I'll get into kind of what happened with Astralis in a minute, but let's talk about Vitality first. Golly, this was Perks against the world. Like, this was Perks against Vitality. That really was this game. Perks had a really good game on the Orianna. He had a decent laning phase. He wasn't particularly, like, super far ahead or super far behind, but those shockwaves in that last team fight, he was doing so much damage. If Perks was, like, even just not, like, if Perks didn't have a phenomenal game in this one, Vitality does not win. That is really as clear as it gets. In this one, Perks had a great game, and he's had a great week, I think, overall. He's been really good ever since that horrendous week 1 where he was pretty much unplayably bad. He's actually been phenomenal. He was phenomenal again here on the Orianna. A pick that, traditionally speaking, you wouldn't necessarily think, like, oh, Perks is going to, like, hard carry on this, but he definitely was the reason they won this game. Pretty much no question in my mind. Everybody else on this team played relatively bad. I think Selfmade played the early game really poorly on the Lee Sin. Going into Xin Zhao, you have to play that early game a little bit differently. He played it really poor. Like, honestly, he's going into the worst jungler in the LEC this year. Maybe outside of Gilius. Zanzor and Gilius kind of fighting it out for it, but, you know, one of them at least. But, like, Selfmade just got obliterated in the early game here. Not a good game from Selfmade. He's actually my dud of the series here. I think this is the first time I've done this in the LEC all year long, in which I put the dud of the game on the winning team, but Selfmade deserves it. He was the worst player in this game. and he was a big reason why they almost lost. Could have given that to Alfari as well. Alfari had a horrible game on the Camille. White Knight pretty much outclassing him early. Promiscu, I would say, outclassing him, quote-unquote, for a lot of this game. Carzzy and Labrov were fine in team fights, but early game, like I said, not so hot for them. This really was the Perks show, and Vitality's going to be thanking Mr. Perks for this win for certain, you know. But obviously Perks is washed, so what am I talking about? As for Astralis, golly, this team is just destined to go 0-18, aren't they? 0-9 to start the year. Pretty much exactly how you draw it up. I have a lot of people in my comment section that are like Kabe defenders, and they're like, I don't know. I call this like the worst bot lane in the LEC over and over and over again. And I have a lot of people who are like, well, Kabe's not that bad. Kabe's not that bad. I think this game is a perfect example of what I have against Kabe, right? Is he's playing Jhin, and in these team fights, does he auto attack? No. Does he Q? No. He runs out of the fight and then ults. And then by the time his ult is opened up, the fight is over. And he's doing like 0 damage. He's like super last in damage like per minute and damage percentage for AD carries. He just does nothing. He does absolutely nothing in team fights. And it's so frustrating to watch him just stand there and be useless. And if you had like 1% of Jhin this game, you probably win the game. Because you have Corki trying to do damage. You have Jace doing a load of damage. Promiscu had a really good game up until that last, like, flank engage in which he tries to flank on Leona and misses literally everything, and then the fight is just completely over at that point. This Astralis team just can't clutch it. There's really no other way to put it. They're doomed. They're completely doomed from winning games if they play like this. It's honestly just sad to watch. They had this game in the palm of their hands. The solo laners had so much gold, and they just kept losing fight after fight, and then that last fight happened, and it was over. Vitality ended up taking the game. So, yeah, I mean, for Astralis, you lost this one, but this is probably by far the best you've looked this year. Still, obviously, 0-9. At this point, your season's completely over. You're not making playoffs. I mean, even if you were to win out at this point, you would only just barely, I think, make playoffs, even if you won out completely. If you went 9-0 from this point, I think at that point, you're looking at, like, praying that you make 6th. But this, I mean, their season's completely over. They're done here. I would start looking at replacements, some young players to maybe just get eyes on. Doesn't really matter if you're going to win or not at this point. You just need to figure out, you know, who's going to be playable for next split. But for Vitality, you're going to be really fortunate to be able to clutch this victory off the back of Perks just playing really well. But honestly, this team is super coin flippy. Alfari has had a low-key, really bad year. He's been not good in the top lane. He's easily been this team's worst player. Even if he's up CS and like quote-unquote winning in lane, he's done absolutely nothing in team fights. He's been a net negative for this team, I think, overall. Selfmade and Perks have really been the carry. Selfmade had a bad one here. That's fine. Carzzy and Labrov, I think, have been fine. They've definitely been on the upswing, but Perks is really the guy here for this Vitality team, and if they really want to contend for an LEC title, which is obviously the goal with this roster, Alfari needs to play better, and Selfmade needs to play better, and the bot lane needs to play better as of yesterday. Like, it has to happen now. Moving on to the 4th game here of day 2, the one that everybody is waiting for me to talk about. Excel taking on Fnatic, and Excel picking up the huge win. Their first ever win against Fnatic. I mean, it had to be with Mickey X. Mickey X is the kryptonite for Fnatic in general. I mean, this Excel team really just looked exactly how we'd wanted them to look all year long. This feels like an Excel team that, for the first time all year long, had finally played up to the potential that this roster has in terms of the talent on it. Marcoon, Patrick, and Mickey as a trio. I mean, that on paper, that is a really strong trio. And this is the first time where all 3 of them were really just like, wow, this was Excel's game. They were phenomenal. Mickey is my player of the game, although just barely over Patrick. Both of them played phenomenal. This bot lane was just stellar. They're really starting to develop some chemistry here between 2 of the best players in their roles in the LEC. I don't really think that that's really that debatable. The Aphelios Leona lane isn't something that is particularly strong in my opinion, but holy crap. I mean, you get to that late game, you get Mickey with these amazing engages on Leona that Fnatic really can't do anything about, and then Patrick is just such a perfect late game teamfight damage output kind of guy. Like, Aphelios is the perfect Patrick pick because it does pretty much everything that he wants to do, which is kind of play a little bit slower in the early game, and then by the time you hit late game, you're just so strong that you can team fight carry. That's exactly what Patrick wants to do, and he dominated on that. Marcoon had a fantastic game on Xin Zhao as well. I don't want to take that away. And then Nuke Duck on those rockets late game, just doing a billion damage. I mean, I think he did like 80% to upset with one rocket late game on the Corki. Just absolutely absurd. Finn with a good game on the Graves. Honestly, everybody on Excel looked phenomenal in this game against one of the best teams in the league. This is the Excel that I think everybody was waiting for. And they finally showed up here. As for Fnatic, definitely some problems. A lot of people are blaming draft. People don't like upset on the Jhin. I can understand that. You want upset on like something more proactive for sure. The Jinx, you know, what is definitely the first thing that comes to mind. But there are a lot of other champions you'd be more proactive with than Jhin. But I still think this comp is super winnable on. It's a little bit passive for my taste, but you want to, if you can get the Orianna ahead, it should be fine. Unfortunately, Humanoid had one of his worst games of the split. And honestly, you know, we were talking about Alfari kind of being that quote-unquote weak link for Vitality when he really shouldn't be last game. That kind of feels like what Humanoid is for Fnatic right now. I'm not saying that he's playing like overall horribly, but when this team loses, it's usually because Humanoid doesn't play up to standard. And that feels like what happened again in this one. Humanoid had a really poor game on the Orianna and just got abused in lane by Nuke Duck. And then in team fights really was a non-factor. Just really not much that this team could have done around this Orianna. Not that Hylissang had a great game on the Rel either. This is definitely Hylissang's worst game of the year. But honestly, Humanoid looking kind of questionable in this team's losses. I think a lot of their success kind of depends on the team not inting. And they have a few players on their team that have kind of been known to coin flip a little bit. Humanoid's one of them. Wonder's another. Hylissang could be that. Razork has been that in the past. I think Fnatic is definitely a little bit more coin flippy than maybe I thought in the first couple weeks, but this team is still really talented, and just because they have one bad game against Excel doesn't mean I'm completely pulling the plug. Just not a good game from Humanoid here, not a good game from Hylissang. Honestly, Fnatic is just going to chalk this one up to just being, you know, having an off game. I think that really is just what you have to chalk this one up to for Fnatic. But if you're Excel, I mean, you're completely ecstatic. Being able to take down Fnatic in pretty much completely convincing fashion, and with all three of your like main players that you're hoping really gel together, really looking phenomenal here in Marcoon, Patrick, and Mickey. This was the Excel roster that I think a lot of people were like, well, why are you replacing Adviena with Mickey if you're not going to be like competing for a top playoff spot? This is a team, I think, if they play like this for the rest of the split, they will be competing for a top playoff spot. They'll be, you know, better than Misfits, better than Mad Lions. Like, if this team can play like that, then I'm not worried about them at all. It's just about whether or not they can continue to play like this against teams that aren't Fnatic and teams that you don't have the Mickey curse on. That brings us to the last game here of Week 4. We had G2 Esports taking on Rogue, two of the top teams in the league, and Rogue continues their unbeaten season in another really dominant win. I mean, this team is really just unbeatable right now. There's really nothing else to say. They are just, with the mental the way it is right now for them, I actually consider them to be completely unbeatable. They are unbeaten through the first half of the season. It's actually insane. The last time I think we saw a team do this was 2018 Misfits, though. So keep that in mind. We're not going to talk about that. But yeah, Rogue with a really nice win here over G2. My player of the game is actually going to go to Comp here. He was just, I mean, he couldn't miss. He could not miss on the Jinx. If you watch this game, you know what I'm talking about. These ultimates were, I mean, just, it's actually insane. At some point, you have to consider it like luck, but it's still skill as well, right? This is just one of those games where Comp on the Jinx is just on another level, right? And I see a lot of people like wondering, it was Comp was always underrated. You know, Comp was always, really good, and no one just saw it because he was on a bad team. Let's be real with ourselves here. It's not that Comp was like terrible or anything like that, but Comp was never this. This is not the Comp that we have seen in years past. Saying that, anybody who didn't see this coming was insane and crazy. I personally don't understand that. Even going back and rewatching some of his older games, like seeing like, was this there? It just wasn't. And yeah, I know ADC performance is really heavily weighted on how good your team is, generally speaking, but even outside of that, Comp is showing like a new level of positioning, a new level of confidence. This is really just like, this is how you play AD carry in a pro region. Like, he's having the best season anybody could possibly have right now. He's looking phenomenal. Larson is kind of with him there. Larson's also having a really, really tremendous year. On that Corki pick, again, it's one of those picks where it's just like, how are you allowed to have this still? He does like 1 billion damage by the end of the game. I believe he was voted as the actual player of the game, but for me, Comp's ults were just too unbelievable. Comp, I should say, also has ridiculously phenomenal synergy with Trimby, which is just not... I mean, Trimby and Hans weren't the best duo together. It really... Like, Hans was kind of solo good in that lane, and then Trimby was kind of just trying to help out. Trimby has really had a fantastic year with Comp. These two have developed a really good synergy together, and they've been one of, if not the best bot lane in the LEC so far in 2022, maybe outside of Upset and Hilly. But Larson, like I said, has been maybe the best mid laner. Him and VTO could, like, argue for that, but you could ask that. Malrang has been the best jungler. Odoamne has been the best top laner. This Rogue team is just firing on all cylinders. There's not a single player on this team that is underperforming. In fact, I would say every single player on this team is overperforming, which I guess just brings up the question, is this their new standard, or are they eventually going to kind of come back to the median? I guess we'll have to wait and see for the rest of the year, but right now, I mean, this team is, like, just essentially perfect. They can do no wrong. As for G2, Jankos gets his record-setting win in Game 1 in the week, and then gets absolutely trounced in Game 2 as a You're Welcome present. He's easily my dud of the game here. He was not good in this one on the Lee Sin. Malrang's just better than him right now. Malrang can't be beaten in the jungle. He's completely taken over. He's completely taken over the LEC. Not that other people had great games here. Caps had a pretty poor game in the mid lane going into Larson. Kind of a tough matchup here with the TF into Corki. You want to try to match... I get that you want to try to match, like, the roams and stuff, but, you know, you're in no way, shape, or form going to be able to output even a remotely similar amount of damage. Flakkid gets put on the Zeri, and really, honestly, overall, this is just kind of a low damage comp. You're really relying on Broken Blade to help you win team fights, and he just wasn't ahead enough. Not much you can do in this one. G2 just kind of got outskilled early. Rogue got really far ahead. Comp is lights out on the Jinx. Larson is a Corki. Odoamne on an Akshan. There's really just, you're going to lose these team fights if you're not ahead, or at least even, and they were not even, and so at that point, the game was just doomed. But yeah, I mean, you know, not the worst loss in the world for G2. You go in and you lose to the undefeated Rogue team. You want to be able to beat them. Obviously, you want to be able to be competitive as well, but, you know, there are worse games, I think, to lose out there than this one, but Rogue just looking phenomenal, looking about as good as any team I think has looked in the world this year so far. We'll see if they can match up. I'd be really excited to see how this team performs in playoffs. Obviously, they're going to make it. You know, even if they lose all their games, they still have a chance to make it. So I'd be really interested to see what this team looks like come, you know, later in the season when we start getting closer to crunch time. Alrighty, that is going to do it for my Week 4 LEC analysis overview of all 10 games. Up on the screen right now, on the left, you are going to be seeing the current LEC standings. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically. On the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings with how they have changed from last week, or at least you would normally see how they would change from last week. But in a rare case, with my power rankings this week, nothing's changed. It's literally the exact same as last week. I think everything went pretty much according to plan other than Excel versus Fnatic, but I still need to see a little bit more out of Excel to put them above a team like Misfits, and I need to see a little bit less out of a team like Fnatic to put them below Vitality. So, honestly, no changes in the power rankings this week. Really, not too much to talk about there. There really are tiers forming. Rogue, Fnatic, Vitality. These are the teams that are really going to be contending for an LEC trophy. G2 can kind of be put in there. They're kind of on the you know, outskirts of that. Mad, Misfits, Excel. These are teams that I think can win any game, but can they do it consistently enough? Who knows? And then BDS, SK, Astralis. These are teams that are just not good. They're not making playoffs unless they make gigantic changes, and they're not in that position right now. So, honestly, not really too much to actually change here. A pretty standard, I'd say, Week 4 overall. My player of the week here is going to go to Perks on Vitality. He was phenomenal this week. He dominated in lane. He's really been on fire in lane recently, but he translated those lane successes into really being super good in team fights late game as well. So Perks is going to be my player of the week. My dud of the week can go to nobody else but Adam on BDS. He was just tragically bad this week. There's really no other way to put it. He was not so good. Yeah, and so Perks and Adam. Perks my player of the week. Adam my dud of the week. Just honestly, those feel like really obvious choices to me. I think on Rogue you could go for someone like Larson, but I thought Perks just had a really, really good week on Vitality overall. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. Let me know what you guys' favorite game of the week was, what your player of the week, your dud of the week, all that fun stuff is. You know I like chatting it up with you guys down in the comment section below. I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.